This is it guys, it's the new Omoda C9. This is easily one of the most disruptive Chinese cars to enter the Malaysian market. Yet, it's big, handsome, packed full of premium features, and the best part, it's sold at a really attractive price point. On paper, this single-handedly makes pretty much all its Japanese rivals appear undersized and under-specced, and even true blue premium cars appear as severely overpriced here in Malaysia. So is this car really all that good? Let's find out in this video. Let's go. This review is sponsored by BH Petrol. Use Infinity RON 95 Euro 4M fuel today to enjoy your car's peak performance. With the latest generation German additives, it keeps your engine at its best, running smoothly and reliably. Special for our viewers, you can now use our referral code BHPXPaulTan and get free 200 e-points when you download the BH Petrol e-card app. First things first, let's talk about the branding issue because man, it is confusing. This car wears Omoda branding just like the smaller Omoda 5, but this one is sold and serviced at Jaecoo dealerships and not Chery. This whole Chery Omoda Jaecoo situation is a self-inflicted problem. Chery, like most other Chinese car makers doing exports, like to offer multiple sub-brands just so they can say they've got multiple brands in the global markets. In fact, back home in China, both the Omoda and Jaecoo brands don't even exist. The Omoda 5 and the Jaecoo J7 are just sold as Cherys over there. Further adding to the confusion, this car right here is not sold as a Chery in China, it's an Exceed, which is a whole different brand again, but that's a story for another time. Actually, this Exceed RX has been around even before the Omoda brand ever came into existence. This has been repackaged as an Omoda retrospectively after the smaller Omoda 5 became a huge success outside of China. Thankfully though, visually this car really works as a bigger brother to the Omoda 5. They both share the same sporty SUV coupe-like roofline back here, and the upcoming Omoda 7 is gonna fit in right between those two perfectly, I'd say. But whether the 7 is going to be sold in Chery or Omoda showrooms, nobody knows just yet. To be fair to them though, this separate showroom issue isn't unique to Chery alone. Denza, which is a sub-brand under BYD, will enter Malaysia very soon, sold in dedicated showrooms as well. Next, let's talk about pricing because that is one of the most outstanding attributes of this car. In Malaysia, we get two variants, a two-wheel drive starting from 169,000 ringgit and this top spec all-wheel drive version that you see over here going for 189,000 ringgit. Even within Chery's own family, that is uncomfortably close to the Chery Tiggo 8 Pro. While this does only have 5 seats rather than 7, it's easy to see a lot of people upgrading to buy this instead. Compared to Japanese car makers, this is around the same price range as the Honda CR-V, but this is clearly a much bigger, far more upmarket product. In terms of showroom appeal, this far exceeds the Toyota Harrier even, and that is about 100,000 ringgit more expensive than this. Looking beyond Japanese brands, a lot of people are even making comparisons between this and proper German car brands like the Mercedes GLC, the BMW X3, and the Audi Q3. Now let me tell you right now, this car is nowhere near as accomplished or as polished as those proper German SUVs, but you gotta remember that this is less than half the price of those cars. This offers say around 70 to 80% of the experience of a proper premium German SUV at around 40% of the asking price. I think that is a fantastic value proposition. choosing between the two variants isn't quite as simple as it is with its stablemate, the Jaecoo J7. While in that car, the differences are mainly to do with its driveline, whether it's two-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, with pretty much everything else being equal. Over here, there are far more significant differences between the two variants. So while with the J7, I will always recommend getting just the two-wheel drive version. With the C9, however, the all-wheel drive version is the one you'd want because the upgrades are definitely worth way more than the 20,000 ringgit difference. You won't find any differences between the two on the outside, of course, apart from the red painted brake calipers on this all-wheel drive versions. But then again, you can hardly see them through the exact same 20-inch multi-spoke alloys. You don't even get any all-wheel drive logos at the back of this car. In terms of looks, I think this car is a winner. At the front, you get this rather elaborate wraparound LED DRL signature, which Omoda calls the Sigma lights. Now, of course, that refers to the actual Greek letter, but now in Gen Z slang, that carries a whole different meaning. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. The grille is also quite unique because it's less of a traditional front grille opening and more of an intersecting art piece similar to a Lexus. It's also quite futuristic, giving off a bit of an EV vibe overall. In fact, I've actually seen this car at a public roadshow with a big sign over it saying, "I am a petrol car," because obviously a lot of people thought it's an EV. That is hilarious. Around the side, you'll see that this car wears premium Michelin tires, which is a rare find among Chinese cars. Both the fake side vents and the pop-out door handles also appear nearly identical to the ones you'd find in a Range Rover Vela, and pair all those together with a sleek roofline and profile, and this overall is definitely a handsome and sporty looking SUV. Back here is my least favorite angle of this car. The top-mounted third brake light does look cool, but the rest of it looks a little bit bland to my eyes. Now, the same look works really well on the Omoda 5, but that's because that's in a much lower segment. Over here on a much bigger car, it doesn't quite work for me. I especially hate this fake exhaust tips at the bottom. This car's saving grace though is that it has an exceptional welcome light animation both front and rear. This is an absolute showstopper, but unfortunately it's only fitted on the top spec all-wheel drive version. Moving on inside, there's plenty to love, but unfortunately there's equally as many things to not like about it as well. Visually, at least, I think it looks stunning. The design alone makes it feel more plush than even the Mercedes-Benz GLC, BMW X3, and so on, not to mention the Toyota Harrier and Honda CR-V. This high center cockpit design cocoons you inside the cabin almost like you're in a proper sports car. Put it all together with the leather touch points, this feels properly premium. But unfortunately, it's not quite there yet. This car uses a lot of so-called wood panels across the dashboard, this center bit over here, and even on the steering wheel. But the wood pattern itself is clearly fake. It doesn't look anything like the real thing. And then there is the build quality. I've already mentioned all the leather portions. The top parts of the dashboard are all nicely soft to the touch, rather plush. But there are quite a few parts of this cabin that feel a little bit cheap. This center console, for instance, just push it in a little bit and it creaks a lot. That doesn't give you confidence on its long-term durability at all. Next, let's talk about the screens up front. This car uses a pair of displays on a curved panel, similar to what you'd find in certain BMWs. The interface itself looks really good, modern and clean enough. And of course, it also supports wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. That's definitely a good thing. Better yet, this is one of the rare Chinese cars to still have full physical aircon controls for the fan as well as the temperature. Over here, that's really easy to use, way better than having to reach to the touchscreen to find small little buttons when you drive along. However, once you start looking deeper into the user interface, it all starts to fall apart a little bit. Now, this car does have quite a lot of so-called shortcut buttons, but the actual touch point itself is really tiny. It's hard to click on the exact point, especially when you're driving along on rough roads. For instance, let me show you the procedure of simply changing the automatic wiper sensitivity function. You have to press the car button over here, scroll all the way down, look for this tiny button right there, and then choose between 1 to 4 and then confirm. That is so difficult to do when you're on the move, it's ridiculous. Worse yet, when you're doing that, clearly your eyes are not looking at the road, you're looking at the screen instead. And then the car will have the gall to call you out on this by saying you're not paying attention on the road through its driver monitor system. I mean, I'm sorry, if your interface is easier to use, perhaps I wouldn't be so distracted to begin with. But anyway, let's move on to things I do like about this cabin, and there's plenty of them. First of all, there is this wireless charger which is rated at up to 50 watts, so you can charge your phone, non-iPhones, at a pretty quick rate. And best yet, this is even ventilated, so your phone doesn't get too hot. That was a real problem in the Omoda 5, where the phone would overheat when charging, especially if you don't have really good quality window tint on. The audio quality of the 14-speaker Sony sound system is also pretty good. It's about on par with the Bose system in the Honda CR-V, if perhaps not quite as good as proper premium mix. But even then, it's decent. This includes a pair of small speakers hidden within the driver headrest, which can be used when you answer calls inside the car. The voice of the other person on the line will be played through the speakers behind you. This is a very novel idea, but I find it a little bit weird because the voice seems to be coming from behind you, so they are literally talking behind your back. That is a little bit weird. Beyond that, this car also has an electrically adjustable steering column. This is a premium feature you wouldn't find even on most BMW models, but it's here on a sub 200k car. That is a fantastic thing to have. But this is exclusive to the all-wheel drive version of the C9. Another thing that's different between the two variants are the seat upholstery. Here on the all-wheel drive, it's genuine leather, while it's artificial leather on the lower variant. But that's not such a big deal, I think. It feels fine on either variant. Another difference is on the side over here, where the all-wheel drive version gets this Tesla-style electric door button release. Another thing you lose out with the cheaper version is the super fancy ambient lighting system. Over here, it's full RGB. There's multiple lines within the cabin as well. It looks fantastic. So it's a bit of a shame that the cheaper version misses out on this feature. One last thing is the integrated fragrance system on this car, which is only fitted to the all-wheel drive. Here you can choose between 3 different scents, and that all comes from a cartridge system that is fitted down there. This to me is such a nice feature. You used to be able to get this in the highest end of Mercedes-Benz models, but those are far and few in between. Now you get it in a much more affordable car like this. Next, let's talk about seat comfort. It's not the worst, but it can be improved further as well. First things first, I really don't like the fact that they've copied a Mercedes-Benz style seat controls over here. Not just in terms of placement, but the actual design itself. The same goes with the engine start-stop button as well. That is a shameless copy. But the seat itself does feel quite comfortable for the most part, but crucially it is missing a base angle adjuster, so you can't have the front portion of the seat base tilted up or down like you can in proper premium cars. Moving on to the back, you get plenty of leg room and headroom back here. For your reference, I am only 167 centimeters tall, but I think even if you're north of 180, you should not have any issues fitting in the back here. The seats themselves are also quite comfortable. The base is nice and long, and the backrest is power adjustable, so you recline it by just pushing that button right there. Very classy, very premium. But at the same time, this entire panel is just a blatant copy of a Mercedes-Benz, right down to the pseudo Burmester speaker grille. That I don't like at all. Plus, strangely enough, the floor is rather high back here, even though this is not an EV, so it's not quite comfortable if you're sitting up straight. But of course, you can always move your feet forward. There's more than enough clearance under the front seat to stretch away, and this is completely fine. As for amenities, there is a full-size panoramic sunroof up top on both variants, I might add, plus a 3-zone climate control system with a dedicated blower control buttons for the rear occupants. Now, weirdly enough, there is just a single vent down the middle, but you also get individual vents by the B pillars on the side. That is again something you'd normally find in high-end premium cars. Another advantage that this car has is the sheer width of this cabin is nice and wide. You can fit 3 adults in the back, no issues at all. One last thing before we go for a drive is the boot. Now, this is claimed to offer more than 600 liters of space, but just looking at it, I don't think it's all that spacious. The floor itself is quite high, and with the tailgate angle being quite steep up here, the actual usable space isn't all that big. A Honda CR-V is definitely far more practical still. But having said that, there is a good reason for the floor being so high, because you lift this up and you gain access to a full-size spare wheel with the exact same Michelin tires and 20-inch alloys. This will come in handy in emergency situations, and if you ever scratch your rims, you've got a spare right here. So on the move with the Omoda C9, as usual, let's start with the engine up front first. This is Chery's own 2-litre direct injected turbo 4-cylinder, and is basically the same one fitted to the Chery Tiggo 8 Pro here in Malaysia, but there are a few small differences. For instance, on the C9, this engine is rated for 261 PS and a full 400 Newton meters of torque. That is about 5 PS and 10 Nm more than what's in the 7-seater Chery. Another difference is the transmission. While the Tiggo 8 Pro is fitted with a 7-speed wet dual clutch gearbox powering the front wheels, here on the C9 you get an 8-speed torque converter automatic that is sourced from Aisin. That is a gearbox manufacturer owned by Toyota. On this top spec all-wheel drive version, I've timed it to go from 0 to 100 in just over 9 seconds. Now, that may not sound all that fast by modern standards, but I think it's more than quick enough for most Malaysian drivers. But put all those numbers aside, subjectively I find this engine and gearbox combination to be a little bit strange. The first impressions you get when driving this car is that there is going to be a distinct gap between you putting your foot down and the car surging forward. Now, this is a combination of both the engine having a little bit of turbo lag, as well as the gearbox being a little bit slow to downshift. But again, this isn't that big of an issue, because once you get used to it, you'll be cruising along, no issues at all. What I do find annoying though is that the engine can sound a little bit rough at times, especially if you're moving off from a stop or going uphill slowly. The engine can have a bit of a rough, gravelly undertones. It's not quite as refined or as smooth as you'd want a big premium car like this to be. And then there's also the gearbox. As you go through the gears, on every upshift there is a noticeable pause in acceleration as the gearbox slushes through to the next gear. And worse still, every time you slow down, at every downshift you'll feel a bit of a jerk going through the entire cabin. This gives off a bit of an old school torque converter vibe, even though this by all means is a modern torque converter automatic. Let me just put it this way, Aisin 8AT nowhere near as good as a ZF 8-speeder. This same gearbox is fitted on the latest Peugeot 408 Turbo as well, and again this car has the same characteristics of having a bit of a jerky throttle pedal. It's almost making me think that this is a DCT rather than 8AT. So at the moment it's not quite an ideal experience. This torque converter should be smoother than most DCTs, but currently it's just not. Thankfully though, you will soon get used to the idiosyncrasies of the engine and the gearbox, and in time you'll find the car to be super smooth, super quiet, super serene when you are traveling along, especially on the highway. This is a fantastic mile muncher if you're going for long distance drives. To me, the mark of a good highway cruiser is how slow everything feels when you're going at a certain speed. This car cruising at 110 feels like you're doing 80 in most other cars. Even when you're going say 120, 130, 140, it still doesn't feel as quick as most other regular cars doing 110. This will make your highway journeys feel super relaxing, let me tell you that. What's not quite so good, however, is this car's fuel consumption. I've done over 300 kilometers in this car so far, and the average fuel economy is hovering just about 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers. That's not especially good, even considering this car's size and weight. Even the Mercedes-Benz GLC 300 or BMW X3 would do far better numbers, let alone the Honda CR-V and especially the NA-powered Toyota Harrier.
This fuel economy test was carried out using BH Petrol Infinity RON 95 Euro 4M, your ideal choice for peak engine performance, smoother drives, and improved fuel economy.
If fuel economy is going to be a big concern for you, perhaps you'll be much better off with the two-wheel drive version of the Omoda C9. That is a full 100 kilograms lighter than this all-wheel drive version over here, so it weighs about 1.8 tons rather than 1.9. Plus, a two-wheel drive setup is always going to be more efficient than an all-wheel drive system over here. This may have an active or intelligent all-wheel drive system, but even in full eco mode, as soon as you press on the throttle, a certain portion of the engine power will be channeled to the rear wheels. This is almost a permanently all-wheel drive setup over here. Next, let's move on to the way this car handles, and again there's going to be big differences between the two variants. The all-wheel drive version gets an advanced CDC suspension or continuous damping control. Simply put, these are adaptive dampers, something you'd normally find only on the higher end versions of Mercedes-Benz or BMW models. In fact, the Mercedes GLC, the current model, is not available with adaptive dampers on any base models in Malaysia right now. So on paper, it is a big, massive shout for a Chinese car maker to have adaptive dampers here in Malaysia, and they've done that without having to inflate its pricing too much. Overall, this is still a very affordably priced car. But unfortunately, the reality is that the adaptive suspension on this car is well behind what we'd find in a contemporary premium car like a BMW. As it is, the difference between the three suspension modes, standard, mid or sport, is very, very small that, you know what, it's hard to find any difference at all unless you are specifically looking for them. It's so small to the point that if I were to just jump into the car without knowing which setting it's set at, I wouldn't be able to guess whether it's at its softest or hardest settings. Usually in a modern car with adaptive suspension, there is a clear and stark difference. Comfort mode will be very nice, soft and supple. Sport mode will hunker the car down far more for much better driving dynamics. Right now, between the three modes, there's hardly any difference, whether you're in comfort or sport. Yeah, I don't know, they all feel largely the same. Now of course, if I concentrate really hard, there is a small difference. In sport mode, you can feel like the baseline is a tiny bit stiffer, but you throw it into a corner, it will still roll quite a fair bit. And even in full comfort, it's not quite as soft and supple as you would think an adaptive suspension car will be. It still has a bit of that firmness through very rough roads. Now, I have yet to drive the base two-wheel drive version with its passive suspension, but I've been told by a Jaecoo product person that the baseline is even softer than the standard. It's gonna focus more on comfort rather than body control. While I can't confirm it right now because I haven't driven it yet, I do have a feeling that the two-wheel drive is gonna be a touch too soft for Malaysian roads. If you get the chance, do try out both variants before you make your final decision, I would say. So for handling, I'd say this car is about average. It doesn't handle too well, but it's also fairly comfortable. So it's sort of in the middle of the comfort or performance slider. It doesn't excel in either one of those, but overall, it's fine. You'd definitely find more joy driving a BMW X3 and more comfort driving a Toyota Harrier. But this sitting in the middle, I'd say it's a good enough trade-off. It's just that it can't quite match up to the adaptive suspension promise you'd get on paper. Moving on to Refinement, I'm happy to report it is exceptional in this car. You may hear a bit of tire roar coming in right now, but again, as usual, we are filming in particularly rough roads here in Putrajaya. Out on better roads, even on the highway, there's hardly going to be any tire roar going in. That's partly because of the tire choice over here. Not only are these Michelin tires, these are also a specific Michelin E primacy rubber. These tires are usually used on EV models, which are highly sensitive to tire roar. So the fact that they're using such high-end tires on a car like this, it clearly shows. And then there's the wind noise as well, or rather the lack thereof. Even when you're cruising up to 130, 140, there's hardly any wind going into the cabin. Just like the smaller Omoda 5, the C9 also has double glazed windows up front, but the wind noise control is just excellent through and through over here. This is one of the quietest Chinese cars I've driven on Malaysian roads just yet. Unfortunately, I do have to talk about the active safety systems on this car because they're just not very good. Again, on paper, it's got everything: adaptive cruise control, autonomous emergency braking, active lane keep assist, lane centering control, level 2 semi-autonomous driving, so on and so forth. This car has it all and more. But sadly, in operation, they're just not very good. I didn't want to try out the AEB system because I really don't want to, but the rest of it, yeah, it leaves a lot to be desired. The adaptive cruise control, every time it detects that it's a car in front of you, it starts stabbing on the brakes, and the lane keep system, it just starts pulling away at the steering wheel every time there is a corner. They're just not good enough, nowhere near as good at this level. Both the Honda sensing system in the CR-V as well as the TSS system in the Harrier are way better than what's available on this one. That is a sad note to end on. So there you go guys, that is my full review of the new Omoda C9 or the C9 by Jaecoo, whatever you want to call it. If you watch the whole video, you'll know that this car has a long list of flaws and shortcomings. I mean, it's rather thirsty and both its engine and transmission can be a little bit rough at times. But you know what? If you really want a damn near perfect large SUV, what you really need is a new Lexus RX, but that's gonna set you back nearly 500,000 ringgit here in Malaysia. If your budget is below 200, this is the closest thing you'll get to the real deal. Overall, if you factor in the price, I can say that this car is nothing short of exceptional. It looks really good on the outside, and inside it is comfortable, plush, and refined. Plus, it's also more than quick enough for most people. You only have to set your expectations in check when you first approach it. If you think Toyota Harrier rather than the Lexus RX, this will absolutely blow your mind. Do you agree or disagree with me on this? Do let me know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching everyone, and stay safe.
This review is sponsored by BH Petrol. Use Infinity RON 95 Euro 4M fuel today to enjoy your car's peak performance. With the latest generation German additives, it keeps your engine at its best, running smoothly and reliably. Special for our viewers, you can now use our referral code BHPXPaulTan and get free 200 e-points when you download the BH Petrol e-card app.